This episode is brought to you by Thorn, and I have some incredible news for any of you that are in the military, first responder, or medical professions. In an effort to give back, Thorn is now offering you an ongoing 25% off each and every one of your purchases of their incredible nutritional solutions. Now, Thorn is the official supplement of CrossFit, the UFC, the Mayo Clinic, the Human Performance Project, and multiple special operations organizations. I myself have used them for several years, and that is why I brought them on as a sponsor. Some of my favorite products they have are their Multivitamin Elite, their Whey Protein, the Super EPA, and then most recently, Cinequil. As a firefighter, a stuntman, and a martial artist, I've had my share of brain trauma and sleep deprivation, and Cinequil is their latest brain health supplement. Now, to qualify for the 35% off, go to thorn.com, thorne.com. Click on sign in and then create a new account. You will see the opportunity to register as a first responder or member of military. When you click on that, it will take you through verification with GovX. You'll simply choose a profession, provide one piece of documentation, and then you are verified for life. From that point onwards, you will continue to receive 35% off through Thorn. Now, for those of you who don't qualify, there is still the 10% off using the code BTS10, Behind the Shield 10, for a one-time purchase. Now, to learn more about Thorn, go to episode 323 of the Behind the Shield podcast with Joel Totoro and Wes Barnett. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show entrepreneur, founder of Child Liberation Foundation, and the author of Sound of Freedom, Paul Hutchinson. Now, in this conversation, we discuss one of the most important topics that I have on the show, which is protecting our children, especially in the world of human trafficking. Now, Paul himself not only has a powerful mental health story, but his business journey ultimately took him into the anti-trafficking movement. So we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the world of finance, how material wealth still didn't create happiness within himself, how he became the bait for a human trafficking sting, some powerful rescue stories, what you, the audience, can do to protect your own children, his latest book, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So that being said, I introduce to you Paul Hutchinson. Enjoy. Well, Paul, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, Tom Datro, for making the introduction. And secondly, welcome to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful, James. And, people like you are my biggest heroes. People are first responders, people who put their life on the line for our freedoms. And some of the greatest men and women I've ever worked with was the undercover work, the former Green Berets, Navy SEALs who retired now decide, I want to continue to do good and help humanity. So thank you for the service that you've given as well.
Yeah, well, just kind of parrying that slightly, these are my favorite humans too, is the group that already served in uniform and they transition out and they continue to say, what else can I do? Ryan Parrott's one of my friends who was just calling me before we started talking. Navy SEAL, created a burn foundation. Now he's got a mental health side to it as well, and TBI. And these are the best kind of humans, because we get paid to wear the uniform. But if you carry on your service and your mission beyond that, I think that's the kind of human that I like to surround myself with.
Exactly.
All right. Well, first question: where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
Right now, I'm actually in South America, in Colombia. After the global success of Sound of Freedom movie, we've had opportunities in countries everywhere to help change laws and policies, work on healing retreat certification programs. So we're spending a lot of time here in Latin America, and I fly back up to the U.S. tomorrow, but today I'm here.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I would love to start at the very beginning of your journey. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
I was born in Utah, in Salt Lake City. I joke and say I had skis on my feet by the time I was 4 years old. Beautiful mountains, beautiful snow, and had 4 younger sisters. And then we had a foster boy that lived with us for a while on an Indian placement program, and then a Navajo Indian brother. But so I only had a brother for about 2 or 3 years, and then the rest of the time was all sisters. And traveled a lot since then. I still have a home in Utah. I literally have not stepped 1 foot in my. I've got a beautiful ranch halfway between Salt Lake and Denver. I haven't even been there one day in the last year. So just too much to do in the charity work in Latin America.
What did your parents do as far as profession?
My father was a gardener when he was younger, and then ended up in sales in a concrete company. He ended up working his way up to the point where he became an owner of Intermountain Concrete Specialties, and then retired. He retired almost 15 years ago. And my mom was a homemaker. She did Mary Kay and nails and everything else to make money. We as little kids, we were, if we wanted to go to Disneyland, we were picking up pop cans in the park. We were figuring out how to save money, and in whatever way we could. We had janitorial jobs growing up. Literally, talk about child labor. I was 8 years old emptying garbage cans in the bank. Right, a work ethic came from when I was really young in contributing to help pay the bills.
Now, you mentioned skiing. What other sports were you doing when you were through the school ages?
Well, I played basketball. Wasn't any good at that. Played football for a year. Wasn't any good at that. I played rugby. And I guess rugby, you just kind of have to be a little bit crazy. We averaged one guy a game that ended up going to the hospital or to a doctor for broken something or whatever. And my mom wouldn't even come and watch me play because she says it was an organized brawl, which it kind of was, but we had fun. We started the rugby team at our high school. And I wanted to get involved in politics in high school, junior high. I ran for office. I was kind of like Abraham Lincoln. I ran for everything and won nothing, right? I literally over and over again. I ran for student body vice president of our high school and lost by 4 votes. And I got a call the next day from the principal, and the vice principal called me into the office and said, "Hey, we love your leadership. Sad you didn't win, but we want to bring you on to be the president of something called the Peer Leadership Team, which helps kids with drug and alcohol abuse and teen suicide situations or home abuse or whatnot." And I had the opportunity to go through a bunch of training that summer on being a peer counselor, and then put together a team. And it was in that space that I started to recognize the darkness in even affluent, nice, decent neighborhoods. How many kids were dealing with abuse in the home? What happened is if a child came to a teacher and said something to that teacher about, "Hey, my dad's been raping me," or whatever, that teacher legally has to go to an authority. A peer counselor, some kids will open up a lot better to us, and then we can encourage them to go to an authority. And so that was where I first started recognizing the damaging effects of addiction, of alcohol addiction and cocaine addiction and pornography addiction, and then the effects of and how many children were dealing with significant abuse in the home. Literally 1 in every 4 women that today were a victim of sexual abuse as a child. And very few people talk about it. With men, it's a little bit less. It's 1 in every 5 at some time in our life. But even them, 1 in every 4 of them, it was under the age of 10 years old in their own homes. And it shows up in so many areas of our life, and anxiety and depression and PTSD and addictions of all sorts, and low self-esteem and anger issues, and in some cases passing on that trauma, and physical, verbal, in some cases sexual abuse. In fact, 70% of incarcerated felons admit that they were victims themselves as children of abuse. And so recognizing that hurt people hurt other people, and recognizing how many of us deal with things that are unresolved, and God bless them. Most of my operators doing the undercover work, most of them were abused as children, and they grew up not to be abusers themselves. Instead, they grew up to be protectors, and God bless them. The majority of people that go through that grow up to be protectors, but all of us need to heal from it. And that's one thing I learned in high school in a very profound way.
It's interesting you say that, especially you had that lens so young, because as I started progressing through this podcast, there's one guy, Jake Clark, who will always attribute this, that really educated me on the prevalence of childhood trauma in uniform, military and first responders. And then you just, by no means prying, but you kind of open the door for someone to talk about that if they want to on this interview. I've done 1,100 interviews now over, and easily, I'm kind of like trying to do the math in my head, but a quarter, maybe a third of the male guests in uniform were actually sexually abused when they were young. So what you see, 1 in 5 of the entire population, but then as you mentioned, you're going to go one of two ways. Like the ACE score, supposedly on average, incarcerated people have a 6 out of 10, and so do we, military and first responders. So you've got that crossroads. And did you meet a positive mentor or a negative mentor that sent you in that one direction? But having this conversation when it comes to first responder and military mental health is so important, because if we're talking, you were in Fallujah, or you were, hunting traffickers in Colombia, or you were a firefighter and saw that horrendous, vehicle accident, and you're not talking about, well, what happened before you put the uniform on, whether it's a soldier, a firefighter, or just a general member of public, we're missing a massive piece of that pie chart when it comes to the mental health conversation.
So true. And sadly, James, the average age of somebody even talking about that abuse as a child, the average age is 52 years old. That's my age. I've raised my kids. I've got grandkids. I've built my career. And if you're holding on to that so long and not even talking about it, then, it's coming out in anger issues and addictions and other challenges. And, so many men were like, I don't want to talk about that. That happened when I was 8, that thing with my uncle. It'll make me less of a man if I talk about that. No, it won't. You were 8. This was a horrible thing that happened with somebody carrying a lot of negativity and a lot of pain himself, that passed that on to that innocent child. And it doesn't make you less of anything. It's the simple fact that you release it. Here's what's super interesting is that high percentage of people who have gone into that service of helping others and first responders who talk about that. It's because they talked about it that turned them the direction of being a protector, of being a healer, rather than holding on to it and allow it to just fester and come out in really unhealthy behaviors. And so talking about it is not a negative. And guys, if your husband says, hey, this thing happened, don't think, he's going to be a predator now. No, the fact that he spoke about it takes the chances of him being a predator going from, 20-30% all the way down to like 1 in 100. The talking about it is what releases it and brings in that healing energy of saying, okay, now I'm going to be a protector.
You mentioned the foster brother coming from the Navajo Nation. One of I think the most underrepresented groups are our indigenous people. And you do hear a lot of issues when it comes to some of the reservations with alcoholism and addiction and domestic violence, and anything where identity has been stripped away and poverty has been forced. Doesn't matter the skin color or the ethnicity. What was the background of that program? Was it a similar kind of trauma background, or was it something completely different?
I can't even tell you how much trauma I saw on the reservation. His what was sad is that the reason why he came when he was 8 years old, and just came up for the summer, and had an amazing education and a family life, etc. His parents were alcoholics, and it came from the creation of welfare mentality. You know, when you've got a free check coming in all the time, and it's enough to just pay your basics, and then you can just drink alcohol your whole life, and there's a lot of challenges in that system that breeds the addiction process. And for him, he wasn't able to come back at 12 years old because his parents realized they got more money from the government if they kept him home rather than sending him on the program, which was incredibly sad. He ended up, going the other direction. After he was home, he was rebelling. He ended up, lighting a fire at the school, getting into juvenile detention, and eventually going to prison because of, mail fraud, a bunch of horrible things that came from the environment that he was in. And so you're exactly right. When you have a government or an institution that strips away identity and creates a welfare mentality, you create a lot more challenges than you can imagine.
Absolutely. Well, that was a deep dive right on the offset there, or the onset, should I say? Going back to kind of your journey through school, when you were in the high school age, were you dreaming of the kind of business world, or was it something else initially?
I wanted to be a doctor. I remember when I was a little kid, pretty young, I was like 7 years old. I came in, I said, Mama, I want to be I know what I want to be when I grow up. And she's like, well, what do you want to be, Paul? I said, well, I want to be a brain surgeon. She's like, oh, she's all beaming with pride. Oh, why a brain surgeon? I says, because I just got beat up and I want to fix how people think, right? and then over time, I was really serious. I actually did a little report in school trying to figure it out. I still have that little report. And then I changed it to being a heart surgeon. I think intuitively, I realized that if you're going to change how people think, it doesn't start with their brain, it starts with their heart. And so I was serious about it. I had taken a bunch of pre-med classes, even in high school. My senior year, I excelled pretty easily, and I was going to the college for half of my day during my senior year to take some additional pre-med classes, and was going to not only be a doctor, but a surgeon, not only a surgeon, but a heart surgeon, not only a heart surgeon, but one who operated on children. I wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist. And 2 months before taking the MCAT, I got in a major car accident, and it was a serious one. I mean, the engine was separated from the car. The back door was smashed in 2 feet, like literally 6 inches behind me. It was a million angels stopping me from dying at that moment. But in that, my hand flew out the window, and I still have I-80, Interstate 80 is still with me 30 years later, and severed all the tendons in my hand. They didn't know if I'd have the dexterity to be a surgeon. They said, Paul, you can be a regular doctor. And I said, I don't want to be regular anything. So I wanted to be a specialized. And I said, I remember saying, if my destiny is to be a garbage man, I'm going to own the dump. That's just how I think. I've got this life to be the best I can be and contribute the most value I can contribute. And if I can't be a surgeon, I need to find something that can contribute. So it was interesting. I had a friend of the family. He was successful, really successful in business. And I went to lunch with him, and he said, Paul, why do you want to be a surgeon anyway? I said, to be honest with you, I want the money. I'll go to school for 12 years so I can drive a Ferrari. He laughs. He says, Paul, he said, you have a unique gift with people. He said, I'm willing to be your mentor. And if you do what I teach you to do, you'll be a millionaire by the time you're 30, and you'll have the time to enjoy it. And I said, what do you mean time to enjoy it? He says, why don't you do this? He said, go sit down with a surgeon who's where you want to be financially and ask him about his lifestyle. And I did. I actually went to lunch with a surgeon who operated on my hand, and because I was frustrated because I wanted to be a surgeon. At lunch, I asked him, I says, tell me about your lifestyle. And he said, well, I've got a beautiful home. I got a motor home, part ownership in a plane. I've got a boat, jet skis. I've got 2 teenage kids, and I don't even know them. I work 100 hours a week to maintain the lifestyle. And I thought, wow, I'm trading time for money. He says, I'm married to my beeper. Back then they had a beeper, a pager, right? And so I went back to that mentor, and he said, Paul, he says, if you build a business right, you'll have time and money. because money without time doesn't matter, and you can have fulfillment if you focus in areas that are creating value. And so I listened to him. He says that the first thing you got to do is you got to learn how to sell. Every successful business owner knows how to sell and knows how to handle rejection. And so that's where I changed focus at about 21 years old.
So what was the initial field you found yourself in?
It was actually sales. He told me, he said, Paul, he said, you should find a job that's the highest rejection job you can find. You got to learn how to handle. He says, because in any sales, any company, he says, you're either selling your idea to your investors, or you're selling your leadership to your employees, or you're selling your project or your product to your customers. He says, either way, you've got to deal with rejection. You've got to learn how to close. And so I looked around. I thought of going door to door selling Cutco knives. That didn't really intrigue me. I looked at some multi-level things that didn't. But I found a job at a call center, 300 employees, cold calling, selling videos programs that help parents learn how to raise better kids. Even little cartoon things that help kids learn honesty and integrity. And this was kind of in line with my philosophy of, if you're going to earn money, do it in a way where you're contributing real value to the world. I'm writing a book called, I don't know the name of it yet. It'll either be like Conscious Capitalism or something that teaches how it can truly be a win-win-win. You never have to have a lose in the equation in anything that you're doing. And so this was truly in line. And I worked my way up, and they brought on a new account. A lady by the name of Lucinda Bassett, who had the Attacking Anxiety and Depression program. And that was so in line with my core beliefs, especially with what had happened in high school, and realizing how many people were dealing with all of this anxiety and depression and PTSD and addictions and challenges. And so I started working with that company, and I ended up starting a company of my own, Midwest Center Marketing, that owned the worldwide marketing for that company. And when I met them, they were $6 million a year in the red. By the time I sold my company, we were $72 million a year, and definitely in the black. And we had over 50,000 people a month calling in off of an infomercial to get a workbook, audio program, videos to help them change the negative habit patterns of thought and other habits that were creating their anxiety and depression that came from unhealed trauma, et cetera. And so, it was a beautiful exit. I sold my company for a lot of money at 29 years old, enough to retire for a while, and was truly blessed because it was something that I felt good about. I felt good that it was truly contributing to creating a better life for everybody, and that's where I first started. And then I started investing in real estate. I realized if I didn't hire guys smarter than me, I was going to lose all my money in real estate. So I put together a team and ended up building an incredible empire in the real estate space.
I've come across a few businesses that have such a beautiful model, that kind of social business model, like you said, conscious capitalism. And I think that's exactly it. It's a win-win. Of course, people need to make money. Some people want to make a little bit more than others, but I don't think it should be at the detriment of, the nation's security, the nation's health, et cetera, et cetera. How did we get to the point where initially America really was, the American dream and that real feeling that anybody can kind of rise up if they want, to what seems to be a kind of worshiping of monopoly, where you will have businesses set up right next to each other with the sole focus to destroy one of the businesses and put all their employees out of work. So how do we get there? And if you were king for a day, what would be the business model of altruistic capitalism?
I think it starts with changing our understanding of money itself. My first chapter in my next book. So I have the Sound of Freedom book that's coming out just in a few weeks in the bookstores, talking about the rescue missions and the healing from trauma, et cetera. But the next book, the one on capitalism, my first chapter is called Scarcity and Abundance. Your economics teacher lied to you. And it talks about how, the very definition of economics is the division of scarce resources, which is a fallacy. We have enough resources where every person on earth could have all the food they could ever eat, all the clothes we could ever wear. It's this understanding of scarcity that makes us believe we live in a dog-eat-dog world where the only way that you can get ahead is by taking from somebody else, from having a business that puts everybody else out. And if we truly understand the value of collaboration instead of that competition, that the human mind literally allows us to create infinite wealth. And I'll prove it with this. I don't care if one of our listeners is living in a studio apartment with barely has enough to pay their bills and whatnot. You're living like a king of a few thousand years ago. If you've got a refrigerator, if you've got air conditioning, you got carpet in your house, literally you live like a king. Now, why? It's because of that creativity of the human mind that is continuing expansion. I love in the English language, we use the word to make money, to create money. And I write in the book, I quote a friend of mine, Paul Pilzer. He has a book called Unlimited Wealth. But in mine, I quote this story that I learned from him that just changed everything in my perception. He talks about how there's imagine there's 10 men on an island, 10 families on an island. And every day the 10 men go out and they go fishing and they catch just enough fish for the entire island. And then one day, two of the women, because they're usually more creative than us men, they're like, these guys are out all day long fishing. There's got to be a better way. And so two of the women come up with this idea of a net, and they sew this net, and pretty soon now their husbands are able to go out and catch enough fish for the entire island. That's a technological advancement. Now, the problem that we have, and is at that point you've got 80% unemployment because 8 of the 10 guys are out of work. And if you have a dysfunctional system, they would vote in a government, they would tax those 2 men 80% of their fish, and everybody else would sit around and create this welfare mentality. A well-functioning system would encourage those other 8. One would get better at building boats, one would get better at building houses, one would get better at educating the children, and lifestyle as a whole for the entire island increases. And literally they made money. They created wealth with that creativity. And now they live in a better world. And that's really what we need to do. We need to understand that we truly live in a world of abundance. And in doing so, changing the way that we work, even in understanding that it can truly be a win-win-win. When I was building Bridge Investment Group, we had massive apartment complexes that we were buying from failing banks during the 2008 crisis. And, at this point, the banks weren't very good managers. There was 4-foot weeds in the tennis courts. There was, the pool drains weren't working. There was a bad occupancy, whatever. And we would buy it, and realizing that in the areas, some of those areas, our primary tenants were Hispanic. So we would do things like we brought in English as a second language and the bookmobile and a tutoring program for these families, and creating a win-win-win. That we came in, we provided liquidity for the banks that were having a hard time with this asset. We provided a job for thousands of employees. We provided value for our investors and the tenants themselves. We're not putting gold towel rods in a B-class neighborhood, but we would go in and these tennis courts that had 4-foot weeds. We're like, what, our Hispanic people that are here don't play tennis, they play soccer. So we took down the nets and put little mini soccer fields and created a true win for them. It doesn't matter if you're living in a 14,000 square foot house or in a 2-bedroom apartment. Your priorities are the same in wanting to have a healthy place to raise your kids. And so creating a true win-win-win was the philosophy in all of those companies that I truly believe added to the massive success of them.
I've made this comment for probably almost 10 years now, and it's actually happening in front of my eyes here in the mall in Ocala. If you think about the last, from like probably late 80s on till somewhat recently, I guess around the crash, the American malls and, the giant supermarkets put all the local businesses out of business. And then you have this consumerism where, if you think about it, there wasn't really a lot of human interaction. You go to a department store, you're not sitting around talking to people. You're sifting through racks of clothes or whatever it is, and you buy your stuff and you walk out with handfuls of bags, and then you leave. But now you're seeing a shift again where these department stores are going out of business. And here they've actually turned one of them into almost like a bespoke store area now, and they have food trucks, and it's going to be within the mall. And this is what I'm seeing, is I think that there's been this massive kind of circle where now people are craving interaction again. So the barbers and the butchers and the coffee shops and the breweries and all these places where you can go in and interact are having their day again now. Whereas before, everything was all about these giant corporations.
I see that everywhere. And I'm excited about, the fact that AI and, the age that we're in allows for people anywhere around the world to have a business and contribute value to everyone else. And used correctly, I believe we can help humanity as a whole pull out of global hunger and poverty anywhere. We can solve these problems. We can't do it through just giving a fish. We have to teach them how to fish, but we can give them the tools to contribute on the worldwide stage in creating value for others, and that's super beautiful to see.
I remember hearing an interview with on Tim Ferriss's show, and he was talking to someone who worked with billionaires, and over again, I think several of his guests said the same kind of thing, that they spent the first half of their life making money and the second half spending it trying to get their life back, their health back, their mental health back. And I look at my population, the fire service, because as we mentioned at the beginning, they are this beautiful kind of servant mentality group of men and women. They don't question the environment they work in. And now you find yourself in the 2020s, and you've got these men and women working 56 hours a week, not sleeping every third day. Then because of mismanagement, now they're understaffed because the things that are broken weren't fixed. So now the same people, not the ones that made the problems, but the people on the ground are now working extra shifts. You're talking like an 80-hour work week, not sleeping 4 days a week, not seeing, their spouses, not being at those, whether it's a graduation ceremony or, a ballet recital or whatever it is. And this is one of the kind of fights that I'm trying to bring is to go back to a work week where our men and women, mentally, physically, and relationship wise are forging health again. But there's a disconnect because the carrot on the stick has always been the 50-cent pay raise, the dollar pay raise, whatever. So with the same lens that you had before we progress on to, what we're here to talk about as far as the trafficking side, talk to me about the currency of time, quality time versus this holy dollar that we seem to have chased for decades and decades.
Well, sadly, I believe that more of us are in slavery than we know, and it's a slavery to a broken system, wherein the majority of your work week is going into paying for, whether it be even if you're in a low tax bracket, the price of your food and everything that you're buying is what it is because of a lot of wasteful spending, and beyond that, there's significant evidence that there are technologies that can provide free power, free energy, that if you took those two things out of the equation, the wasteful spending and the energy thing out of the equation, literally, you could live your exact same lifestyle and with 4 to 10 hours a week instead of 40 to 100 hours a week, right? And so it's so important to understand that the one thing that we can't get back is our time, and so many times, especially those who are in the most important roles, our service roles, whether it be teachers or first responders, et cetera, they're sadly trading time for money for things forever, and they're stuck in a system that isn't putting the value on their incredible contributions the way that the value can be placed in other industries, and that needs to change for sure. But at the same time, very few people get to their 50s and 60s and look back and say, well, I wish I spent less time with my kids. That never comes up. They grow up quick, and that's your most valuable resource. And I recognize that myself after I got really successful in business. I recognized, wow, some of the most beautiful moments were ones that I wasn't there for, because I was on the road. I was out building this or that. And so you very seldom hear people that made it financially that say, I should have spent less time with my kids. That doesn't happen.
Absolutely. It's interesting, you look at the most progressive or some of the most progressive business leaders, and you're seeing now that work week shrinking. I think Iceland and the UK just did a big study, and a load of businesses went to a 32-hour work week, four-day work week, and saw the same, if not more, productivity, innovation, efficiency, and obviously a much healthier, happier workforce that was then using less sick time and vacation as well. So, that what I say to my profession, because they call themselves a business sometimes, like, all right, well, then why are you mimicking an Indonesian sweatshop rather than a progressive business leader? So if they're doing it and they're getting, the gap is even bigger now between a Google employee and an American firefighter, we've got to start pushing the other way. And not just the people in charge, all of us, the voices of the base of the pyramid.
Exactly. And that's something that I believe that just like the net on the island was something that created more opportunity for everybody to advance in some way, that literally everybody instead of those 10 men fishing 8 to 10 hours a day, they could all take turns and have the same lifestyle, and everybody could just fish an hour a day and get everything done as well. And so, we can all decide, do we increase our lifestyle financially with more stuff, or do we work less hours? But the truth is, as we have continued advancements in technology, it's not that these technological advancements are going to put us all out of business. No, they're going to be replacing things that are mundane. Hopefully we'll have good systems that can replace the majority of people working in the legal profession. Right? Let's get them in a place where you don't have crooked attorneys in there. You have a system that can really assess all of the evidence and create a legal framework where we're not going to be taken advantage of in any way. I can't tell you how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars I've spent on attorneys over the years, and thinking, you can have systems that can replace a lot of that. And that's beautiful. That's good. Let's all find other more productive things to do. And that's going to happen moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the factory workers that have stood there for decades, just screwing on nuts or welding a piece or whatever it is. That's a beautiful thing about innovation. And the same with my profession. Now you've got telehealth, where you can have a dispatcher connect someone who's got a low acuity call with a nurse rather than sending a fire engine and ambulance to a call. So I mean, it is there. Absolutely. 100%. You made a comment a little bit earlier, sounded like when you were in the business space, you kind of were immersed in the money and the success. Was there a disconnect, and did that send you into that next chapter of your life as far as altruism?
Well, I have to tell you, I'll be full disclosure here. 12 years ago, I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effing Hutchinson. Right? I had built a company that was phenomenal with our team. I told you I started in the real estate investment stuff when I was 29. Invested a lot of money there. Built an amazing team. Came together with some other teams, and I had billions with a B, billions of dollars under management that we were managing for some very wealthy families, and I was living high on the hog. I mean, at one point I had 2 helicopters with a plane. I had 50 plus vehicles that I had to do registrations for every year, including my motorcycles and trailers and crap. And I'm thinking, how many can I drive at one time? I had a house that had 8 private suites, 10 bathrooms. The maximum people that lived at that house, most of the time it was just me. And sometimes it was maybe 2 people living there, right? 10 bathrooms, 3 kitchens, 7 fireplaces, and a basketball court in my basement. And that was, and I was having parties and I was living large and I had some friends that cared enough about me. These were, well, I'll just even back up a little bit more. I was living this lifestyle when I first got contacted by some operators, the attorney general, and some others that needed me to play a role undercover to help rescue some trafficked children. And the reality is the reason I needed to play, I was the perfect one to play that role, wasn't the fact that I had some significant training. It was the fact that I was living the lifestyle of what these traffickers were looking for. It was, sadly, it was arrogance and greed and lust that consumed my life. And it was arrogance and greed and lust that was driving some of these horrific things. Now, I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was contributing a lot of money to child-related charities, but they needed to show this profile to these traffickers. This trafficker had a piece of property he wanted to develop into a brothel resort type of a thing, and needed $8 million to do it. So the undercover operators are like, well, I got the perfect guy that can do it. Look at this guy, and boom, I've got pictures with me with Ferraris and Lambos and hot girls and jets and yachts and all this crap. And they're like, oh yeah, that's the perfect one. And so that's what spurred these traffickers to call the other ones and brought together what ended up being the rescue of over 120 children. It was because I was that guy. I was in this space of greed and lust and arrogance, and that resonated with them.
So when prior to that phone call, you have, everything. You have the MTV Cribs lifestyle. Were you happy then?
Absolutely not. I was on my second marriage, headed for a divorce. Actually, at the time of that call, I was on my first marriage, headed for a divorce, because I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing in that first marriage. And I thought that one more girl would make me happy. I thought that one more car would make me happy. I thought that, one more party would make me happy. And none of it was fulfilling.
So you get this phone call, you're told about this undercover operation. Kind of walk me through how that unfolds, and then parallel to that, was that the beginning of a healing journey for you?
It was the beginning, but the real healing didn't happen for a couple years, maybe a year and a half after. But that was absolutely the beginning. I had been asked to help fund some missions. I was on the Make-A-Wish board of directors in our area. I was the incoming chairman for Make-A-Wish in our region. And I had donated a lot of money to child-related charities. I will say this, from a trading time for money standpoint, one of the things that a mentor told me in my early 20s, he said, Paul, he said, if you make the decision today he said, the average person donates about 2% of their annual income to charity, to making a difference in the lives of others. He said, I don't care if you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever, any of those major religions believe in the Torah or the Old Testament. In the book of Malachi, it talks about donating not 2%, but 10% or more. It talks about the tithe. And it says, prove me now herewith if I will not open you the windows of heaven, that there will not be room enough to receive it. This is a very specific law with a very specific reward. And so my mentor said, you can call it God, you can call it karma, you can call it universal law of exchange, call it whatever you want to. He said, it works. You decide today that it's not going to be 2%, it'll be 10% or more, and building your companies and the success of them will be so much easier. And I'm like, oh, that's why I wanted to be successful, so I could be charitable. I never thought that I should be charitable so I could be successful. Now, I'm not saying that you should do charity just so you can get money. That's the wrong energy. But I promise you this, that if you decide to contribute until it hurts, that the windows of heaven will open. And there will be blessings that there won't even be room enough to receive it. And that's what early on I thought, okay, I'm going to just give money away. I'm earning $2,000 a month. This was in my 20s, right? And I'm donating like 10% of that, even 20% of that. I'm giving it to some guy on the side of the street that's asking me for drug money. And my friends are like, are you sure you're making a difference there? And so I decided to focus full time on the truly innocent, a child in a position completely outside of any decisions that she made to get her into that place. That's why I helped with Make-A-Wish and One Life at a Time and the Ronald McDonald House, a bunch of different charities. And so I had helped with this anti-child trafficking foundation. I'd helped to fund some things. And then I got a phone call from one of the operators. I was at the time, I was in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm at a conference with third generation multi-billionaire families at this conference. They're raising money for my investment fund. And I get this phone call and he says, hey, we're in Cartagena, Colombia. We've identified over 100 children that we can rescue. He said, it's going to be one of the biggest child rescue missions in one day in history, but I need your help. And I had already donated some. And I said, well, how much do you need? My ego self, right? He said, Paul, I need you. Can you be in Colombia in 2 days? I'd never been to Colombia, right? I had heard that in the Pablo Escobar days, it was super dangerous. You could pay $200 to have somebody taken out. And I'm like, me, why do you need me there? He goes, well, the head trafficker's got this piece of property he wants to develop. He needs some money. He said, the story is this. You come down, you meet with him, tell him, listen, I'll fund your project under one condition. We're going to have a party and you need to bring all your existing inventory. They needed to figure out a way for this guy to call all the other traffickers and bring all the children to the same place, because they realized there was a bunch of traffickers that had kids in the area, but if they did one sting, then boom, all the others go away. So somehow they needed to bring literally all the traffickers, all the kids to one place. How are they going to do that? They start with the top dog, get him to say, hey, I'll bring all of these guys together to prove to you that I have the inventory to make this project work. So that's what the story was. So I said, so what should I wear? You know, I'm at this billionaire real estate conference thing. And he said, come as a wealthy Playboy investor. And I looked down, I've got $2,000 cufflinks on my shirt. I have a monogrammed, my suit cost more than my first car. In fact, my suit was conservative light blue on the outside, but you open it up and it was bright pink. I'm like, oh, there's a Playboy, And I had a Breitling watch on. I'm like, I think I got the outfit, So he says, come as if you're that investor, because we don't know who he's got on planes or whatever. He says, just come as that. And so the next day I jump on a plane, fly to Colombia for my first time, and had a layover in Bogota. Thought that I would be on the next plane in, and the Navy SEALs were picking me up in this bulletproof car. Well, there was a layover and it got delayed and they couldn't fly into Cartagena at the right time. I ended up I said, well, okay, it's late at night. I'm just going to go get a hotel. I go out in this taxi. Rule number one, don't show up in a second, third world country dressed like a target, right? I'm definitely dressed like a target. Rule number two, when you go out front, get a reputable taxi, not some guy with a hand saying, hey, you need a ride, right? That was stupid me, right? So I get in this car. He says, where do you want to go? I says, take me to the Marriott. So you start driving. And I see the Marriott pass us like 10 minutes later. I'm like, a Marriott. He goes, hotel. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm freaking tired. Just take me where. And then 2 or 3 exits later, he takes this exit and goes in this dark area of town. I mean, there's drug dealers, there's prostitutes, there's a bunch of thugs. He stops in front of this hotel that's like a rent by the hour place. He goes, hotel. I'm like, no, Marriott. He goes, no, hotel. I'm like, shit. If I get out right here, dressed like I was, with my Breitling watch and my all this crap, I'm done. That's not going to work at all. I says, no, hotel. And I had donated a bunch of money to the Unified Police Department. And as part of that, they had given me an honorary colonel badge that said honorary colonel, but it looked like a real police badge on the outside other than that said honorary colonel. And so, I happen to have that in my bag. I don't know why I even brought it. So I grab it, I pull it out, I go, Policia, Marriott, ahora, please, Marriott now. And he takes me there. But, I thought, wow, maybe I should have listened to my business partner when he said, Paul, have you thought through this? This is really dangerous. You're going to Colombia dressed as a target to convince these traffickers. But, I remember when he said that to me, I said, John, I said, when I'm 95 years old and I look back on my life and I say I built this big company, or I climbed this mountain, or I helped rescue this many children, which one of them matters at all? And so, that was, and then the next day I flew into Cartagena to meet with the traffickers for the very first time. And that was the beginning of my healing.
So walk me through that then. Again, you have no idea what you're doing. You're going on this kind of fake pitch for this, acre brothel. How did that unfold, and what was the result of all that?
Well, I get picked up by the Navy SEALs, full bulletproof car. I'm thinking, okay, this place is probably more dangerous than I thought. Now, Colombia's cleaned up a lot now. In Medellin, Colombia, where I am right now, literally it's safer than most cities in the U.S. It's beautiful. It's like the city of eternal springtime. But I didn't know this back then. And plus, I was going into Cartagena. That's not too safe. And they pick me up, take me to this restaurant, and there was some former Homeland Security agent there. There was a former CIA guy there that were all undercover with Colombian federal agents there with a bunch of traffickers. And I thought, okay, traffickers, they're going to be, earrings in their noses. They're going to have tattoos down their neck. First trafficker I met was a businessman. No tattoos at all. Clean shaven, polo shirt. Well spoken. I'm like, oh, that's not a trafficker. And the next I met was a beautiful woman. She was working with a modeling agency, and she like ran for Miss Cartagena at one time. And I'm like, these aren't what I thought was traffickers. But we sat down and started talking. Oh my word, it was dark conversation. In fact, James, I realized over the next 10 years, in leading over 70 undercover child rescue missions in 15 countries, I realized that the common thread with traffickers wasn't earrings in their noses, and it wasn't tattoos. The common thread was arrogance, greed, and lust. It was the same stuff that I saw when I was looking in the mirror. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was helping kids, but I had to recognize after a couple of years how is that contributing to the toxicity of the world, So this is what it was. They were just filled with this lust. They were filled with this greed and arrogance and, a disregard for what they do to other people with their words and their actions. And so, we're halfway through this meeting, and one of the traffickers leans forward. He goes, Pablo, he says, I have a gift for you. I said, really, what's your gift? He hands me a phone. There's a picture of an 11-year-old girl on his phone. This was transition number 1. He said, this is Princess. She's a 0 kilometer mile model. She's 11. She's my gift for you for this party. He starts talking. Have you ever driven an 11-year-old 0 kilometer? And I thought, oh my hell, this is real. This is the first time where I saw what I knew was a trafficked child. And she was so innocent in this little picture. I thought, this is horrific. And in the movie, in the Sound of Freedom movie, my character is played by the producer, Eduardo Verasti, and it's the billion-dollar fund manager who quits his job to go rescue kids. And in the movie, when Jim Caviezel comes to me and says, hey, come undercover in Colombia, and I turn him down in the movie. And it's not until Jim Caviezel gives a picture of this 11-year-old girl to my driver, and then I open up that envelope and I see this picture of that little girl, and that changed my mind. In real life, I was already there. I was face to face with the most evil people on the planet that were selling children. But it was that picture of that child that galvanized my commitment to help on that mission in whatever way they needed. And so, I exchanged contact information with some of the traffickers, and one of them, Edouard, he was the one who actually owned the property. I remember I was, it was about a week into it, and I was making sure he was bringing the all the inventory he had, and he sends me a picture of him in his car, and he's got a 3-year-old in the back seat. He said, "This is my daughter." Now, he wasn't trafficking her, but he said in the text, he said, "This is why I'm doing this, is I want to make sure she has all the cars, Ferraris, nice boats, and everything else. This is why I'm building this retreat." This brothel thing. And then he sends me, and I think, I realized over time, over the next 10 years in doing this work, that many of the traffickers end up trafficking their own kids. So that was the road she was on over time. And he sent me a text and he said, I believe that God sent you to me. And in my mind, I thought, you're damn right. God did send me to you so that I can make sure that that child in your back seat never has to go through what that 11-year-old is proposing to go through that you showed me in that picture. So a week later, our guys had met with the federal agents in Colombia, the U.S. Offices down there, et cetera. And the federal agents in Colombia provided 40 officers. All of them were flown in from Bogota because they didn't trust any of the local cops in the area. And of those 40, 4 of them were our maids, 4 of them were our waiters, 4 of them were our cooks. They're not very good cooks, but they're armed, right? 25 were there to storm the party at the right time. We end up buying a whole bunch of alcohol, and we didn't want to be drunk for it, but we were like literally pouring out all these bottles all over. And 2 of the CTI agents, the Colombian federal, they're like, what are you guys doing? We're like, yeah, we're disposing of all this to make it look like we had a party. They're like, that's good beer. We're like, can we dispose of it for you? And so, they did that in their own way. Weren't very effective at the event, but these guys ended up showing up with 54 children in Cartagena. There was 3 separate cities at the same time: Cartagena, Medellin, and Armenia, Colombia. Between all 3 of them, 124 children. So I'm there at the Cartagena one. They bring these kids in on these boats. And I talk about this in depth. In the Sound of Freedom book, I give parents tools they can use to keep their kids safe. I go through the rescue missions and the emotional transformation that I had in these missions. And I talk about how on the boat out there, one of my operators, Joseph, he said, I realized the magnitude of this problem when our 2 boats, the size of school buses, end up getting filled with these children and the traffickers. He said, and halfway out to the island, one of the older children who had been trafficked for a while pulled the younger ones to get together, including this little 11-year-old who was scared to death because she was a 0 kilometer mile, as they referred to her as. And she was so scared. And he pulls her and some of the other kids together. And Joseph said that he doesn't know what they said, but they all held hands. And the older one had them bow their heads, and he offered up a prayer. Now, the boat engine was too loud where Joseph didn't hear what was in the prayer, but little did they know that prayer was already answered. That waiting at the island were former first responders, were Green Berets, were people like me that were already there posing as the guys for this party. And that it was less than an hour away before their liberation would be complete. And so, they come on the island. We put them in this separate place there's kind of a grass roof building type thing. And we're sitting outside with the traffickers with undercover cameras so we could capture everything they were saying. So they couldn't say later, oh, I thought they were coming to a pool party. No, you said on camera, this is why they were here. This is what they're doing. This is what they cost, et cetera. And halfway through that meeting, it was the end of it. We ordered tequila. Tequila is the sign. This is the sign to have the agents, the cooks and the waiters radio, and then boom, we're supposed to have this storming of the island by 25 special forces guy or the Colombian federal agents. Well, we ordered the tequila, and they were supposed to hit within 2 minutes. It was 5, 10, 15. It was 45 minutes later. There was a problem with one of the heads of the big problem. I go through the details in the book, but we didn't know what the delay was. And the traffickers, because we ordered tequila, say, okay, it's time for the party to start. And one of them, Fuego, takes out the cocaine. He puts it there. And a couple of the traffickers go in the house to bring out our gifts. And I could hear some of the kids crying, and we're like, where are the agents? What's going on? And they come back out, and they have 4 virgins, 3 little girls, 1 little boy. This little boy was 11. I believe he was brought in from Haiti. They gave him cocaine because he was so scared. What kind of fucked up monster thinks that that's attractive? You know, everything in my body would just hug these kids and say, you're going to be fine. You're going to see your parents. I couldn't say that. I'm sitting on a chair. This trafficker brings out this little girl, the same one he showed me in the picture. Same one we called Rocio in the movie, that one they called Princess. This little girl at 11 years old, standing up, was no taller than I was sitting down. And so I literally was eye level with this little girl. And I could see her makeup had been smeared because she had been crying. She had red braids. She had a little kitty cat on her shirt. Looking into her eyes, all I saw was fear. And it was at that moment that I made a commitment to myself, to God, to that child, that I would dedicate my life to eradicating that evil from the face of the earth. Half an hour later, after the agents came, the most beautiful moment of my life was the Child Protective Services people were in with the kids. And they started laughing. They started singing with the children. And that singing, that sound of freedom, was the most beautiful sound that I ever heard. I started crying, turned to the officer that was with me. I said, bro, I spent my whole life making money, making rich people richer. I want to make a difference. What can I do? He said, Paul, sadly, there's a lot of demand for stuff like this that comes from people like Jeffrey Epstein. He said, don't get this wrong, but they're guys that walk and talk and dress like you. What he was talking about was my arrogance and my greed and my lust, right? He said, if you're willing to be the bait, I'll change your whole life. So that was the beginning. I ended up retiring, quitting my job, dedicating full time to, in the beginning, liberating the children. And now, after 10 years, helping to liberate humanity, because I believe that's really what has to happen. It's not pulling the hell out of the kids. It's pulling the hell out of, not pulling the kids out of hell. It's pulling the hell out of the adults. It's take away the demand. It's fixing what we need to in humanity so we don't have to have these discussions. So we don't have people who are going to Colombia to do something with an 11-year-old.
Well, firstly, I mean, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's such an uncomfortable conversation, but that's because it's so fucking horrific, you know, and you can't turn your head because you're uncomfortable listening. Otherwise, you're complicit then. So it needs to be pulled out into the spotlight. I want to kind of just go in backstories of victim and predator. Let's start with the predators first. As you start going mission after mission after mission, and you've highlighted, and I've had so many people on the show already talking about human trafficking. Everyone from Tamia Naj, who was trafficked from Hungary into Canada, to the guys from Deliver Fund. There's a complete misnomer that, like you said, it's some kind of disheveled, creepy dude with a white panel van that shows up and puts a bag over someone's head. But you hear more often than not, it's the scout leader, it's the swimming coach, it's the teacher, it's the millionaire, whatever it is. So hurt people. What, if any, are the common denominators between the backstory of these predators themselves?
First of all, tools for parents to know. I'll answer it with this. People will leave the Sound of Freedom movie and they'll be, I want to go do something. I want to go rescue kids. So the worst thing you can do is go undercover in Mexico. You're going to get arrested. You're probably going to get shot, right? The best thing you can do is go home and hug your children. And people are like, well, how is that, going to help? Well, holding your family together is a big important thing. In fact, the majority of children who are being moved around to other countries they're not coming from a healthy family. They're coming from broken homes, runaways, a broken foster care program. That's a whole other subject. But more important than that, for most families that are listening right now, is that you need a relationship with your kids where they can very comfortably come to you and say, "Hey, mom, hey, dad, I don't like it when you hired this babysitter because she's shown us pornography and she says we should trust her more than you." Or I don't like it when you tell me to hug Uncle Harry because he touches us weird and says we should have secrets with only him. Or I don't like this friend's house because her brother is taking pictures of us when we're changing, and now he says he's going to send them around the school unless we do other things with his friends. The list goes on. If you, in any neighborhood, I don't care if you're in an apartment complex or an affluent neighborhood, you walk out your front door, you look left, you look right, there's a very high chance that one of those doors is a dangerous place for children. The simple fact that one of every 4 women that you know have been a victim of sexual violence as a child, and so many men as well, it's a generational trauma. Somebody doesn't just grow up and go to Colombia or go to Mexico or go to Thailand and go have sex with a child. It's very likely that they were already in that space in abusing their neighbors or their own kids or their nephews or whatever it was. And this happens all the time. And here's the thing. I realized after 10 years of undercover, 70 missions, 15 countries, I recognized that every time we pulled these kids out of hell, the thing that I wished is that I had a time machine. I could go back and fix it before it happened. How do we prevent this so we don't have years of healing with these kids? And I thought, okay, if I had a time machine, I went back in time, what would I do? If I just pulled the kids out of hell, if there was still a demand there, more kids would be sucked back in to fulfill that demand. So what I would do if I had that time machine, I would sit down with the perpetrator. I would sit down with the trafficker and say, what is going on in your life that makes you think that in any way it's okay to go down that road? And what I would find is that the majority of the traffickers were trafficked themselves as children. The majority of the perpetrators were abused themselves. Now, again, like we talked about earlier, God bless us, the majority of people who go through that trauma end up being protectors. However, it's incredibly important that we recognize that hurt people hurt other people, and healed people can heal the world. And that's really what it's about, is that those first responders were able to take that pain and heal through it in the process of helping others. That the operators I worked with who were abused as children were healing through their trauma by talking about it and saying, not on my watch, that's not going to happen. And so finding tools that can help people heal from that trauma is the only way that we're going to eradicate child trafficking.
What about from the victim side now? You touched on a couple of areas, the broken homes. It's amazing. One of my guests was pointing out, if you look at homelessness, you don't normally see young girls, especially, or young boys, but there's so many runaways. And she was saying that a lot of times they get corralled into the trafficking side very, very early. So you've got the runaways, you've got the broken homes. What are other areas? Because again, if we want to change the world, we start at home. What are other areas that are making our children vulnerable to being victims of this horrific crime?
Well, more than ever right now is the internet. We think that, that the most dangerous things for our children is not lurking in some alleyway. The most dangerous things for our children is sitting in their backpack or in their back pocket, right? It's their access to the world. It needs to be, you need to have conversations with your kids and help them recognize that, yes, this is the way that you connect with the world, but do you really need your social media to be open to everyone, or can it just be open to your your friends, right? Is there a possibility that one of those guys is a 45-year-old dude that's doing some horrific things on his end? There's a lot of what they call sextortion going on, where you're and this happens a lot. And the average age is 12 to 14-year-old boys, where they are online. They're on a gaming platform, and they get contacted by a 13-year-old girl on there who sends him some nudies, and then encourages him to do the same. And he does nudies and videos, and pretty soon he's asked for more and more in videos, and pretty soon is being sent to him that they're going to send this around the school if he doesn't do other things or pay money or whatever else. And that's not a 13-year-old girl on the other hand. It's a 45-year-old dude, right? That's using the anonymity of the internet to perpetuate these crimes. In fact, the reality is, if your children's pictures is just open out there on the internet, there are programs, there are notify programs that these predators can use to take that picture of your little girl, your 13-year-old, and create a nudified picture that looks very realistic and send that to her and say, here's what we have of you. Now we're going to do other things if you don't do this and that. So it's a dangerous world with the quote anonymity of these predators. Now, I will say this, you predators, if there's anybody that's listening right now, you're not as anonymous as you think. We've got guys on our team who are super hackers. These guys are part of the black hat organizations. Black hats, those are the guys who do highly illegal things for the right reasons, right? They're the ones who took down the Ashley Madison site and shared with the world everybody who was cheating on their wives, right? These guys will go in. They have software that goes into the deep, dark web. These guys thinking that they're completely anonymous on these Tor networks, and that are able to go into these networks. And even if you have a VPN and you think you're hidden, guess what? Your computer has a global identifier number that's unique to your computer. And every time that you're on there, we had just in 1 month, we identified 800,000 unique individuals in the United States alone who had downloaded a child rape video. It's a horrific problem, and we know who you are, and your attorney generals know who you are, and we're coming. So you better chuck that computer and be done with it, guys. Be done with it. So anyway, yeah, I get passionate about this stuff.
Well, of course. I mean, how can you not? I was watching a documentary a few weeks ago, and it was on kind of a group of influencers. I forget, they were called the Rat Pack or something like that. I forget the term now. And it was a group of like tweens turning teens, and the kind of dark side was behind it was, I think it was the mother and then her boyfriend. I'm blanking exactly who, but a couple of adults, and they were just basically forcing these kids who originally did this for fun, making TikTok type stuff, but then after time it became almost like forced labor. And I think they were talking about being able to track again through the internet, who was actually subscribing to their channels. And it was something horrendous, like 80% of them were actually adults. And so even, you think your child is innocently creating social media, TikToks, you got to be really careful, because again, who is watching that? The handle, just like you were talking about, whatever 7532, you have no idea if that's one of your school friends or some 50-year-old pedo that's watching from Alaska. So, being
Absolutely.
mindful of that too, it really kind of opened my eyes as to just how vulnerable these young people are when they put themselves out on the internet like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And have those conversations with them. Say, hey, you know what? You don't need to have your tag on there that's tagging all your pictures of where you are. I mean, we did undercover work in Mexico where the traffickers were bringing in victims that they were identifying on the internet as ones that were traveling without parents and whatnot, and maybe with an older sister or some friends, and then they would get them drunk. They would take them on a free ride on their boat as a guide, and then they would give them drugs, and they would take their passport, and they would do horrific things. So it happens a lot. So and you don't want the predators online to know exactly what time every week you're at the ball game, or you're at the dance recital and whatnot. Let's no reason to have the whole world be prying in on your kids.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the other side now. This is the thing that Tamir was doing. People that had been trafficked, trying to get them down their own healing journey to process such a horrendous trauma and then try and, come out on the other side. So talk to me about that part of what you do now.
Okay, so this is going to be new for some guys, but I promise you this next 10 minutes is going to be worth every second. So let me start with my experience. I was a couple years into the undercover work. I was still Paul fucking Hutchinson. I was still had this massive home and this massive ego, and arrogance, pride, and greed was still there. Yes, I was helping the children. We were rescuing kids, but that was adding to my own toxicity. Why? Because now I had the best panty dropper story on the planet, right? For my parties. I was an undercover operator, right? And two of my agents called me. Then they said, Paul, they said, I know we've been finding ways to try to help some of our operators deal with their PTSD and the challenges of the darkness of what we're doing in this work. They said, do you trust us? And I said, yeah, I trust you with my life. They said, you need to come to this healing retreat. I was like, I don't need to heal. I'm Paul F. and Hutchinson. They said, yeah, you need to heal. You're on your second marriage, headed for a divorce. Your kids don't talk to you. You think that one more party and one more girl is going to solve your problems, and it's not. And so they brought me into this retreat that was the most transformational experience of my life, bar none, changed everything at 10x on even seeing that first trafficked child, everything 10x. Now, what they were using, this was a doctor that they were working with that had a program with the proper, this is so important, guys, the proper use of psychedelics when it comes to trauma therapy, PTSD, addictions, childhood trauma, all of these things, anxiety, depression. And so let me explain it on a 30,000 foot view, because I'm now one of the most outspoken people on the legalization. In fact, I just got a text yesterday from RFK inviting him to an event that we're doing later. I've been friends with RFK for about 10 years. He's agreed to, one of his commitments is to decriminalize the proper use of psychedelics when it comes to trauma therapy. And now I'm not a fan whatsoever of somebody going to a rave party and getting high with their friends, because you do it in the wrong environment. It can be incredibly damaging. However, here's the science behind it. When we're children, we go through this state of neuroplasticity. We're very, very impressionable, where we can learn 3 or 4 languages at the same time that we're learning how to walk and talk and eat and all of these other things. And so in that state of neuroplasticity, if something happens, if we're abused by our uncle or we're whatever it is, and we're in this state where it gets literally implanted into our subconscious mind, and then it gets hardened when we're not in the state of neuroplasticity anymore. Now the rest of our life, it's like hardened. You imagine, a concrete freeway where they pour the concrete, it's in this flow state, but then it hardens and it's all bumpy. They don't smooth it out. We go through our life with all these bumps. And in order to change something in our subconscious mind after that, it takes about 21 days of consistent effort to create a new habit in that subconscious. Well, psilocybin in mushrooms. And I thought in the beginning, well, that must be really dangerous. It's a Schedule 1 drug. It must be as dangerous as cocaine. The truth is, and guys, do your own research on this. The truth is, psilocybin is safer than table sugar. There's never been a case of addiction. There's never been a case of overdose, not one. And when used correctly, what it does is it creates a temporary state of neuroplasticity, just like when you were young, very impressionable. Meaning, if you have a trained facilitator who understands how to work with childhood trauma and those underlying issues that are creating your anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, etc., they can create in literally a single session, 4 to 6 hours, not 4 to 6 years, 4 to 6 hours, create as much progress as 10 to 20 years worth of therapy. I've seen it over and over again. In fact, it was so profound for me. For me, my experience, because I was in this Paul F. and Hutchinson state, I talked with the facilitator. She says, let's talk, let's create an intention coming in. I says, well, one of my intentions, I lost my relationship with God many years ago when I left the church of my youth. And I'm in this state where maybe some of my words and actions are negatively affecting others. And so this facilitator, boom, we're not talking about microdosing. We're talking about a macrodose in the right environment with the right music, with the right facilitator, etc. And it was the most beautiful, horrific experience of my life. Horrific because I felt that the music that she used and the type of strain that she used of the psilocybin and the talk beforehand intention, I felt in every cell of my body the pain that my children felt when I cheated on their mom, as if I was them. As if I was them, the pure empathy, that energetic connection that we have with everyone. And then I felt the joy of the children that we helped to rescue when they were returned with their kids, as if they're with their parents, as if I was them. And then the pain of the family that broke apart because some guy was at my party and slept with a cheerleader and his wife left him. And then even the ripple effect of those actions of that party that I put on, where now in a fatherless home, his daughter, maybe in the future ends up getting abused or raped or by the stepdad, or the son ends up getting addicted to drugs. And the ripple effect of my actions, of every word, every party, every time I show up, it was so profound, as if I was those people. It felt like Satan himself had his foot on my chest and pushing me down to hell. And then the facilitator changed the music, and it was as if God was literally pulling me out of the depths of hell, and all this shit was coming off of me. And I recognized that I wasn't defined by the money I had and the parties and the sex and anything else, that I could show up with true authenticity. And then, I don't like to get spiritual, but I will on this. I was, after that experience, I was sitting talking with the facilitator and about what happened. And there was these Greek gods. I had Zeus and Poseidon. I had Atlas holding the world on his shoulders. And I was still a little bit in my ego space. And I said to the facilitator, I feel a lot like Atlas. At the time I had 4,000 employees, right? I says, I feel like Atlas. I've got the world on my shoulders. I've got billions under management. But I'm the one that's helping to hold the world up, type of an energy. And she smiles, she laughs at my ego space a little bit. And she said, Paul, I honor that you're kind of seeing some traits in those Greek gods there, but as well as I do, those were mythological gods. She said, what about your relationship with him? And she pointed at the statue of Christ. And I said, I'm in a very open-hearted, open neuroplasticity state. I said, well, I don't qualify for a relationship with Jesus. She said, well, why not? I said, well, I left the church of my youth many years ago, and my bishop told me until I was rebaptized in that church, I wouldn't have the Spirit of God with me. She said, do you really think that that's true? I said, well, no, I try to do good. I help in the charity work. And she said, why don't you rebuild that relationship? So here I'm on mushrooms. I'm so high I can't even walk, right? She helps me take this statue down. I hold it on my beanbag, and I held it for the next 2 hours crying, reestablishing a beautiful relationship that had lost a long time ago. And, it's different for everybody. We started using this with our undercover operators who already had 300 missions in Afghanistan and Iraq, who already had PTSD, that, one mission with me, seeing a menu with children's faces of the things that they would do, sent them over the end. And so using these tools and helping them break free of their PTSD, their addictions to pornography, their addictions to even things like Xanax and Prozac for all their problems. And then we started using it with adult women who had dealt with severe trauma as children, and then adult men, and found that it was so incredibly effective that almost 95% of the people who we now run retreats. You can go to liberatinghumanity.com. You can not only get information on the book, the Sound of Freedom book, but you can get more information on the proper use of these tools and the different retreats we have. We have to run these retreats in Latin America because, it's not legal in the US yet. But 95% of the people who come through our retreat say it was the number one most positively transformative few days of their entire life. And so I'm incredibly grateful, but it's so important that people understand the proper use so we don't end up having a bunch of kids going to rave parties and going in that neuroplasticity state when there's rave music going on over here and an orgy going on over here and somebody yelling at their wife. It's dangerous to be in that neuroplasticity state in the wrong environment.
I've had so many conversations with people that have found incredible healing with the gamut of psychedelics. So ibogaine obviously is a very popular one, especially in the SEAL community. It seems to be incredible with addiction. Ayahuasca, you've got MDMA. You've got, obviously, if you have to be the other side of the US law, then you've got ketamine. But there seems to be one absolute truth, is to underline what you said. Let's take ketamine because that's a good example where you can do it the wrong way under a clinical setting. I have people that say, "Oh, we tried ketamine, didn't work." And I said, "Well, explain to me what it looked like." So, well, I went in, they hooked me up with the IV and they lowered the lights and then they went out. I said, "So you opened the door to the closet in your mind, but no one was there to help you sort through anything." So that seems to be the thing. Obviously, having, a culturally competent, licensed, clinician that's, or shaman or whatever the trusted person is with this journey. But if you've got no one with you helping you to kind of unpack as you start seeing these things and talking about these things and leading you through, I think that really is the underlying issue between these air quote bad experiences and all these, just hundreds of great experiences that you're hearing from people in uniform and everyone else in the community as well.
You're so right. It literally 10% of the healing is the medicine, 90% is your intention, is the environment, is the what I call the container, which is including the facilitators, et cetera. And we have a high ratio. We had 20 people at our retreat 2 weeks ago, and we had 8 facilitators that were there, trained facilitators helping people through and working through their issues and whatnot. And it's a beautiful experience when done correctly. We have pre-curated playlists that were put together by scientists at Johns Hopkins University. And so, I sadly with ketamine, it's the only one that's legal in the US, but sadly it's the only one that's addicting. It's there are people who get addicted to ketamine, and it's synthetically produced, which is why the big pharma and the drug companies are allowing it to be legalized so they can control it in that way. They don't want us to realize that literally you can grow some mushrooms in your backyard for free, and with the right environment, with the right coaching, with the right music, with the right people that are there, you can break through 10, 20 years worth of trauma in a very short period of time.
The irony of drug prohibition has become so strong as I progress through almost 9 years now of these conversations. I've said this many times, but my mom moved to Portugal about 25 years ago. And in 2001, I think it was, or 2000, they actually had such a horrendous opioid crisis in Portugal. They tried the, war on drugs shame method from the America, epic failure, just like we've seen here. And so being this beautiful, truly democratic country, they put it to the people as like, we're thinking about decriminalizing drugs. Here's what it will look like. We're going to take the money we're pouring into fighting addicts specifically, not smugglers, not dealers, but the addicts. And we're going to start putting in mental health counseling, addiction counseling, job creation, housing. And it went to a vote. It initially got the vote and they had opposition from their kind of right wing. And then as they watched its success, the opponents ended up being huge supporters as well. And in less than 10 years, they had reversed to the lowest addiction of anywhere. And so, I'm hearing that from my mom and speaking to João Goulão, who's the guy who literally spearheaded that in Portugal. And then I'm talking to all these special operators. And first you hear about the opium fields were really what was funding terrorism and, killing our men and women in the first place. But then you have these men and women in uniform that fought for this country, that came home and then had to go overseas to get the treatment for what they did for America. You start to just see all these tears in this prohibition fabric. And then you learn the origin story of prohibition, which was based on racism and job justification, and an 80-year longitudinal study, which is, we know it's a failure because the first responders listening, we all respond to those failures, the homelessness and the addiction and the sex work and the overdoses and et cetera, the gangs. So I think this is such an important conversation, and as this gains momentum, and as especially these communities that are highly respected start being vocal about this and honest and vulnerable about it, I hope that we are going to see a shift, because trank and meth, do they have a place? No, and we can leave those in a prohibition state somewhat, but even then, the addicts, you still envelop and you take them into the medical community, not the criminal community. But when you see MDMA, when you see, psilocybin, iboga having these amazing effects, CBD, THC, and there's so much opposition, and we all know now it's so clear. I mean, the FDA approved OxyContin and refused to approve MDMA-led counseling, for example. I mean, do we need any louder voice than that? I think now it's beautiful seeing it gain traction. Texas just had a big win. RFK was supposed to come on the show, and then he changed administrations, and I haven't heard anything since. But I hope to get him on one day to carry on what he was planning on doing. But I think this is going to be a renaissance. But people have to understand the why and really unlearn this. This is your brain on drugs bullshit that a lot of people were raised on.
Well, and what's interesting is people will classify it. It was so funny. I remember I told my mom a couple of years after, she was wondering why my huge transformation. I had gone from this ego self, and I told her, well, let me tell you why. Now realize I grew up I grew up in the Mormon church, right? No alcohol, no tea, no tobacco, it was anything mind altering. So for sure this would be really bad. And so when I told her, I says, I feel closer to God now than I ever have. She goes, "Oh, you only feel close to God when you're on drugs." It's kind of her. But a lot of people will classify these in the same boat as all these drugs, and in reality, it's exactly the opposite. In fact, we have some doctors in Peru who have over an 85% success rate in helping cocaine and heroin addicts completely break free from those addictions using ayahuasca, and without any relapses at all, without any withdrawal symptom, which is phenomenal. And so again, it has to be the proper use. But it's exciting to see the momentum, the changes. Sadly, the late 60s, they were all thrown under the bus, but you can look up, type online right now. Guys can type in, dangers of cocaine, alcohol, and psilocybin, and you'll find a chart, this big chart, and the very, very top, the most dangerous of all of them in terms of harm to self and harm to others is alcohol abuse and alcohol addictions. Next to that is crack cocaine, and then heroin, and then regular cocaine, and then all the way down, literally with almost zero harm to self or others. Almost zero is things like psilocybin. Now, the only time there's harmful, you don't want to go driving your car when you're on mushrooms, but in your right environment with the right facilitators, with the right intentions, coming into it with clarity. And beyond that, it's, part of our retreats includes teaching some breath work tools and meditation tools that you can go home every day. These are, we want to give people the tools where they can get into that place of the heart and release the toxicity that doesn't belong to them. Everything of your past, everything that was done to you, everything that you did, all of it can be released if it's not in alignment. And we teach some different meditation tools. People think meditation, that's Eastern versus Western. That's an anti-Christian. No, it's not. Think about how many people pray. Think about this. Okay, here's how we were taught to pray. It's very one-sided. It's praise, praise, praise. Sorry, fix, right? It really is. It's okay. Praise God, this and whatever, and please forgive me this, and please bless this, etc. Can you imagine having a relationship with somebody? Let's say you call up a girl and then you call up your wife. You call up your wife and say, "Hey, wow, you're the most amazing wife. You're so sexy. You're just amazing. You're it's amazing. And by the way, I really screwed up on this. I crashed the car. I left the dishes out. And by the way, when you come home, can you sweep up and everything, fix. And then you hang up the phone and you don't take any time to listen. And that's how most of us do. It's a very one-sided conversation. So learning how to tune in to that space in the heart, learning how to receive that guidance in the important areas of our life is really important. So, we teach that as part of our retreat, and teaching breath work, teaching meditation, teaching active meditation and quiet meditation, as well as helping them really get clear on their intentions so that in the experience they can, boom, break free of all of them. So
there's no question in my mind that whether it's Greek, or Roman wisdom, whether it's, the Torah, the Bible, whatever you choose your wisdom from all these different corners of the planet, that they were passed down for us to learn from the things that were good and the things that were bad. Try not to repeat these mistakes. And here's, some tenets for hopefully a healthy, happy life for you and your family. But the problem is those are passed on by people. And you talked earlier about the tithe and the 10% going to charity. Now, a lot of times we see that go to a church that may not be charitable. And then you have, guilt and shame. You're an addict, you're this, you're that, you're homeless, you had sex before marriage, whatever it is. And I feel, this is just my opinion, I grew up, exposed to the Church of England, didn't really dive in much, didn't quite align with, again, the kind of common denominator for me of just kindness, compassion, gratitude, all the dismal hymns. I'm like, like Eddie Izzard talks about, exactly. Life is amazing. Why are we so depressed in church? I don't get it. So talk to me about that.
Use that, dismal hymns. But here's the problem, the reality is the reason why we're so stuck as humanity is that we've been taught a fear-based theology, a fear-based everything. When I say fear-based, I'm talking guilt and shame and remorse are fear-based energies. They're in that frequency, that low energy frequency. And if it's not tied to love and forgiveness and removing judgment, here's the thing: the very second that we're in a place of judgment, and this is where a lot of theology just pounds into us. We need to be the judge of everything. Judge. Well, I recognize, even after doing the undercover work, that if I'm ever judging another human being, whether it's for cutting me off on the freeway, whether it's for stealing from me in business, whether it's for selling me a child, if I'm ever judging another human being, there's a 100% chance, not a 70, 80, a 100% chance that I don't have all the facts. I don't know. I don't know if that guy cutting me off on the freeway, I don't know if his wife's in the hospital. He might just be an asshole. But even if he's an asshole, I don't know if he's an asshole because of how he was raised as a kid. I don't know. There's a million different things that could cause that. Now, he still probably needs to get pulled over so he doesn't put my life in danger, right? That doesn't stop the fact that he needs to get pulled over. That guy selling me a child, he was probably raped himself when he was a child, right? Again, it doesn't justify his behavior. He still needs to be in a position where he can't hurt innocence again. But I can do so from a place of compassion, not from a place of hate, anger, and judgment. And so that's if we're gonna have a higher level of consciousness of humanity, if we're going to help people heal through this trauma and not hold on to it, we can't hold on to that same low frequency of fear and guilt and shame energy and judgment energy that's keeping so many of us stuck. So yeah, I agree with you on that. It's love is the answer. and a lot of people who are, stuck in that dogma space are going to have a hard time with that. Just recognize that the God of creation is a God of expansion, a God of love, a God of releasing those things that don't serve us. It's not one of division, of anger. So, anyhow, I'll just leave it at that.
I was reflecting a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of, this is not meant to be, I'm not making fun of by any means, but if you look even at the Bible, which is the holy book I'm most familiar with, even God had post-traumatic growth, because the Old Testament is pretty freaking revenge-based, let's be honest, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But then you get to the birth of Christ, and like this is the disconnect. If you literally read about what Jesus was doing in his community, being with the people that were struggling the most, lifting them up when there was kind of worshiping idols, that's what pissed him off. I like that. He was kind of, a little angry as well. He could throw a punch if he needed to, flip some tables. But the whole point was it was kindness, compassion, unity, community versus, that revenge, that judgment, all that kind of side. So even if you look at that particular holy book, I would argue that there was a growth even from God in that particular thing. So I think when you look at the actions of some people, for example, they claim they are whatever religion that they subscribe to, but then they come out and they want the homelessness moved out of their neighborhood, and they think that Narcan is a waste on addicts. There's a pretty giant disconnect between the pious person that you perceive yourself to be and the person that you actually are. So I think taking a look in the mirror, reevaluating your interpretation of whatever religion you subscribe to, and then seeing if it aligns. I think if we all did that as a planet, you would find some realigning elements that I would argue if you truly could literally wave a magic wand, then all of a sudden, the Middle East and the States and everywhere else where there's conflict, you would see it go away because people would realize that we are all sharing the same human experience.
So true. So true. I actually joked with my wife the other day. I said, sweetie, I was listening to one of the lost books of the Old Testament. Was like the book of Enoch. And I was comparing, I said, you know what? The depiction of God in the Old Testament needs a journey, right? So journey is another word that we refer to some of the psilocybin, retreats that we do, filled with a lot of jealousy and anger. And I'm going to kill the world because they don't look there. There's a lot of that energy that was there and a lot of teaching of division. We're gonna kill all the Canaanites, and we're gonna put a mark that says that you were the first murderer, and that makes your skin. And women have to go through God to get man to get to God. There's a lot of division that was created there, and so I do believe that the future will be one where we recognize that we are all one, that there's not this division, that we don't have to be throwing missiles at each other because we have different theologies or because our great-great-grandfather 20 generations back had 2 kids and one of them got the birthright, right? The blessings from God and the other one didn't. I mean, there's so much there that of division that we see today in our world that is creating a lot of the challenges that we have. And, on the note, you talked about the man in the mirror. I love this story. Imagine there's a man on a couch and he's sitting there reading his newspaper. And his little boy comes in and says, Daddy, I want to play baseball. You want to play baseball? No, I'm busy. He's watching the newspaper, right? And pretty soon the little boy, he says, Daddy, it's a really pretty day outside. Can we play baseball? And so the man turns the page of the newspaper and he sees there's this map of the world, and he tears it out. And he tears it up in little teeny pieces of paper. He throws it on the floor and he says, you know what, son? You need to learn your geography. Go get some tape every single country exactly where it needs to be. And when you do that, I'll go play ball with you. He thinks it's going to take a few hours. Like 5 minutes later, the little boy comes back and it's taped together perfectly. He's like, what, did your mom help you? He goes, no. He says, I did it all by myself. He says, how'd you do that? He said, well, he turns it over. He says, well, there was a picture of a man on the other side. I just put the man together and the whole world came together. And that's really the answer. We can sit here and point fingers everywhere, fix this, but until we take a look in the mirror, and that's what Paul F. and Hutchinson had to do. I had to take a solid look in the mirror and say, okay, yeah, you're using your money for a lot of stuff and a lot of things that are in alignment with the charity work and a lot of things that are out of alignment. But what if you could repair that? What kind of an impact could you have there? Could you, instead of just rescuing more kids and getting an ego boost and having a panty dropper story, what if you could create a movie? What if you could create global awareness? What if you could have, instead of 20 or plus kids at a time being rescued, what if you could have hundreds of millions of children be safer because of how you lived your life and where you put your money? That's making an impact. And that would have never happened in the space that I was.
Beautiful. Well, you mentioned the movie. You mentioned you got a book coming out. The movie is The Sound of Freedom. The book is The Sound of Freedom. So talk to me about, the genesis of the film and then what made you write the book that's about to come out now.
Well, the film itself, we realized that, back at the time of Abraham Lincoln, it wasn't the guys rescuing the slaves that created the biggest difference. It was people like you James. It was influencers. It was like Harriet Beecher Stowe. She wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was the media of the age, created an awareness with good people of what was going on in the South. In fact, years later, when Abraham Lincoln met her, he says, so you're the little lady that wrote the book that started the big war, right? So today, it's awareness that is really going to spur change. And it comes with people like you. It comes with influencers. And so we did the movie. Sadly, we got pushed back everywhere. I was a primary investor in Sound of Freedom, executive producer. We brought on some other investors and other producers later, et cetera. But we had it completely finished. Got pushed back by Hollywood and everyone else after it was finished. It took 5 years before we were able to bring it to the world. And finally, when it did, 2 years ago last week, became the #1 independent film in the world. And over 70 million people have seen Sound of Freedom. Hundreds of millions of children are safer because of that film. But people will leave Sound of Freedom, like we talked about earlier. I want to do something, trafficking is a thing, but they don't have the tools. And so I wanted to make sure that families had the tools they needed to keep their kids safe, understanding what situational awareness is and what skills you can teach your kids and what to be aware of. All of these undercover missions, I have a really good understanding of how traffickers are getting their kids. I have a really good understanding of how kids are being abused in the home. And so giving parents the tools they need. The first section of my book, Sound of Freedom, is called The Making of an Undercover Operator. The first 5 chapters is all about that. But in the making of it, I talk about learning situational awareness, learning hand-to-hand combat, learning and the charitable side of things, and creating money and being able to then turn that around and do good with it. Then I go through the rescue missions, some that we depicted in the movie and then some others. But the last 5 chapters of the book are all about liberating humanity. What do we need to do to heal from this? So we don't have to have these conversations in 10 years. We don't have to be worrying about the fact that trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world and the second most profitable. All this crap that we're dealing with today, how do we fix it? How do we heal humanity? And so that book is coming out in Amazon on July 29th. And it's going to be just a beautiful opportunity for families everywhere to get the tools they need to keep their kids safe. And I'm going to take you through the emotional roller coaster I went through. You hear a few of the same stories we talked about here in even more detail. I'm careful, just like we were in the Sound of Freedom movie, I'm careful to not be too graphic to the point where you shut the book, because I need you to go through that experience so that you can come out the other side transformed like I was and having the tools that you need to make the world a better place.
Beautiful. And what about the Child Liberation Foundation? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I through our foundation, the Child Liberation Foundation, and others, you can go to just Child Liberation, childliberation.org. Through that foundation and others that I have helped to fund and start, over 7,000 victims are now back with their families. And so you can go even on the Liberating Humanity site or the Paul Hutchinson official site. You can go into any one of those and you got links into the Child Liberation Foundation. For years, that foundation was helping pay for all of the rescue missions that I was on and others. We still have guys that are out there on the ground. But more importantly now is the healing of humanity. And so the foundation helps with the safe houses, with programs, healing programs for the children. It has certification programs. We had people in not only law enforcement, but in hospitality and in hotels and also in the medical industry. It's important that they know what to look for. Over 85% of children who are being trafficked actually go to a doctor while they're being trafficked. The traffickers want to make sure their inventory is well taken care of, and so the doctors need to know what to look for, what the signs are, et cetera. And so we took down a huge trafficking ring between Peru and Ecuador because the doctors knew what to look for and gave us the gave us the tip. My wife went in and talked with the girl, and then got additional information. We took down this massive ring because of the fact that they knew what to look for as well. So again, the Child Liberation Foundation, you can go to Liberating Humanity, and it gets information on keeping your kids safe. It gets a link to the Child Liberation Foundation. It gets a link to the book. If you forget Liberating Humanity, you can just type in SOF book, soundoffreedombook.com, and it will take you right into that landing page as well. Or you can go right onto Amazon today. That's even better. Go to Amazon today. You can pre-order Sound of Freedom book and get that there in your home to give you the tools you need.
Brilliant. Well, I want to throw some closing questions at you before I let you go. But just before I do, I think one of the most important things that people need to hear when it comes to a mental health journey is the hope of post-traumatic growth. Because you've got the people that deny that mental health is even a thing, but now you've got this kind of group that's like, all right, I understand the stigma, I should be able to talk. And there's almost like it's kind of like the drug commercials. Well, I'm living with my depression, I'm living with my anxiety, and it's a very doom and gloom message. But then you hear, like just on this podcast alone, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with this kind of metamorphosis of who they are. And now on the back end of whatever healing journey they found works for them, that unique toolbox is, the person 2.0, which is so inspiring for other people that are struggling. So talk to me about Paul today and which elements of growth have you had as we sit here talking in 2025?
I will say that, I have this little meme that has a mama and a baby. They're both, pieces of coal, and the dad's like, it's a diamond. And mama's like, yeah, your dad's going through a lot of pressure right now. Right. And so the truth is that's how diamonds are made, is through pressure and heat. You don't make a diamond by just sitting in a coal pile. And so some of the greatest lessons of life come through our greatest adversities. And, changing your perspective of saying, what if I chose my parents before I came here? What if I chose this path? Why? So that I could be a diamond, so that I could go through that pressure, so I could go through that pain, so that I could come out on the other side being so much better than I could have if I was just sitting in a pile of coal. And that's really how we need to look at everything in life. Our adversities will make you stronger. They will, if you choose to allow them to do so. Don't allow yourself to be defined by your past. Sadly, I have family members who are still super stuck. They're super stuck in holding on to their past. And, whether it's abuse or whether it's choices of their past or whatever, and they just stay in that place. I see so many people that are like, oh no, I'm not going to. This is why a lot of the guests I bring on to even my podcast on Liberating Humanity are people who went through shit. They went through horrible childhoods. I have one that's coming out this week with a guy by the name of Fox. He was in the foster program and horrific childhood. I mean, I can't even touch the surface of how bad it was. But then he had a librarian that believed in him and says, you know what, you can continue on this path, let it define you and end up in prison, or you can allow it to make you stronger. And he ended up building his first drone company that he sold for millions at 19 years old, and then continued and became incredibly successful and philanthropic in everything that he did. And so again, it's those hardest times, and then that recognition that doesn't have to define me, that helps us become the superstars that you can be in your 4.0 and 6.0 version of you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad you said. I think this is it. I mean, you put that back. You empower the individual to look in the mirror. I think one of the phrases I love is reasons, not excuses. So you identify the things that have caused some of your behaviors from what happened to you when you were younger. You see them. You take the energy away from them, but you don't cling on to them as an excuse, as an identity. You now start working through whatever it is. And now, I forget the term, but the Japanese pottery that's broken, they use gold glue to repair it. Now you're this beautiful version of yourself, and you're proud of your scars, because that, in my profession, is what makes a courageous, empathetic first responder, is someone who's been through struggles, found their way through the other side, and now they can really empathize with the people that are struggling on the streets that we respond to. So it's so great to hear and so important to hear. The first of the closing questions I love to ask: is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Marianne Williamson, A Return to Love. Brilliant. One of my favorites. Four Agreements are a great one as well, but A Return to Love kind of sums it all up. And it touches on what we were talking about earlier, on that frequency of fear versus the frequency of love, and how that fear permeates so much of people's lives and keeps them stuck. But that frequency of love, it will heal all things.
What about films and documentaries?
I think The Sound of Freedom is a great one.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, I my favorite. I love the movie Braveheart, and I love The Matrix 1. Matrix and Gladiator was a great one as well. That's phenomenal. But The Matrix, I believe in a way it's a documentary, not a movie to me, right? We live in a space where our thoughts control way more than you can imagine. Your reality in your life is controlled by your dominant thoughts. And if you can step into that place of knowing who you are, and that incredible power that lies within you, that all you have to do is recognize that power and live in a place of pure, unwavering faith in what you're creating in your life, that you'll be able to transform your world in a really beautiful way. And so, that's what I got out of that. Whether that's what they meant to teach me in that movie or not, I don't know. But Braveheart and Gladiator were two beautiful. Probably because I also, on my father's side, through my grandmother, she was a Stuart, which is the Stuarts of England were royalty years ago. And so because of that, literally I can follow my family line all the way back to Marcus Aurelius Augustus Caesar, and all the way back to William Wallace. Literally, I've got direct connections with both of them. William Wallace actually had a child with that princess in the movie Braveheart, and ended up coming down. And I can trace, most of us can trace our lineage back to axe murderers and royalty at the same time back there somewhere. So it was kind of fun.
All right. Well, speaking of amazing people, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
There's a lot of them. A lot of my operators are phenomenal. Jimmy Rex was one of my undercover operators. Jimmy did 13 missions with me, but Jimmy is he's an amazing soul. He started a foundation or a company called We Are the They, which was super powerful. It's a men's group. After one of our missions, Jimmy was dating a girl, and she said, "I don't want you to go back again. That's really, really dangerous. Can't they just do it?" And Jimmy says, "We are they. We are the they." And he recognized that so many people just kind of sit back and allow other people to take the lead to make the world a better place. But it's something that we all can do in stepping forward. And he's got an incredible story. And I have a few of my operators, a guy by the name of Dave Lopez. He's a former Navy SEAL, did a bunch of missions with us, a heart of gold and a great order at the same time. He's great. And one last one is Glenn Devitt. Glenn ran that group that I told you about that has those deep web hackers and stuff, and he's seen the darkest part of humanity, and does now is public in sharing that mission, and the people and the military guys that he works with as well. So all just incredible humans.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for that. All right. Well, the very last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you, the foundation, the book. What do you do to decompress?
I spend a lot of time at one of our sanctuaries that we use for the healing retreats. We got that's where I am now. As we got 200 cacao trees, we have a river coming through the middle. It's springtime every day. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's my favorite thing. It's just unplugging, leaving my phone here where there's internet, and not having anything, just going down by the river and just soaking in the nature. And I meditate every day, every single day. I do a breath work. I get into my heart space. I feel infinite love, unconditional love of God flowing through my heart, expanding out to all of humanity, releasing in that meditation space. I do what I call a ho'onopono, which is I'm sorry, I forgive you, I'm grateful, and I love you. And it's a whole meditation thing that I use to release negative energies with anybody or even ever previous version of myself. So those meditations are super beautiful in getting recentered in where I need to be.
Fantastic.
And getting in touch with me, the Liberating Humanity. You can go into all social media, liberating.humanity. I come up first if you type in liberating, or liberatinghumanity.com. Is where you can get a lot of information on keeping your kids safe, on the retreats, on the book, etc. Anything Liberating Humanity, or childliberation.org to find more information on the foundation itself.
Fantastic. Well, Paul, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation. And not only from obviously the kind of informational and storytelling side, but even your own vulnerability with your story. I think there's just so much power to that. And then I know that so many people listening and they get so much out of this conversation, including any parent out there realizing the vulnerability of our own children here in America too. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you, James. I'm incredibly grateful for you trusting me with your time and with your audience today.